So what brings you in today?
I was diagnosed with complex PTSD a couple years ago. So I really wanted to talk to you to just learn a little more about it. Whatever you could share with me about complex trauma and what we know about it and how we can heal and move through it. Yeah.
Before we get into that, can I hear a bit about your story and how you came to that diagnosis?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up very close to my family. So there's myself, my younger brother is 4 years younger, and my parents. And we grew up like a very tight-knit family. We were always spending weekends doing family bike rides and like just very family focused. I was even quite very attached to my parents as a kid. I really struggled with sleepovers, camp trips, things like that. I had a picture of my family that I kept under my pillow if I would go anywhere. So very, very close with my family, and especially my mom. She was the type of mom where you could really open up and talk about your feelings, which I always really appreciated. And then when I was, I guess, a young teenager, the years are a little bit fuzzy for when things kind of started to shift, but there was a big shift in my family. My parents were social drinkers, sometimes drank on the weekends. If they played in a dart league, they ran a dart league actually, and I think they would drink on nights like that, but never really at home unless we had like people over for games nights, a few beers, that kind of a thing. And something kind of shifted. As far as I know, they went on a kind of work trip vacation and drank a lot while they were there. And then when they came home, things started to shift. I noticed they would drink a lot more during the week. And I'm not quite sure how long it took to where the drinking was happening every day. Okay. And so, yeah, at first it was kind of like a happy party drinking kind of vibe. And somewhere that shifted to something very different. Things had kind of progressed to the point where people started noticing. And my brother and I, or maybe I should just speak for myself, but I would really do my best to kind of hide it from other people. And that was for a couple of reasons. I was very scared of my family falling apart. This kind of like, these relationships that were so important to me. And I just really, every morning when things seemed okay and my parents would reassure me that, you know, that's not going to happen again, I would really want to believe that. But eventually I stopped believing that. Yeah, there was a lot of my parents asking us not to tell anybody, and a lot of kind of denial about what was going on. Eventually, in like the last year before my mom passed, both my parents had lost their jobs, so they weren't working, so the drinking got worse. And eventually Child and Family Services got involved. There were a couple incidents.
How old were you around this time?
16.
Okay.
So once Child and Family Services became involved, my brother and I both went to stay with family friends at first. And it was really hard, but also we stayed with people that we trusted. I started off by staying in my own room in their house, and my brother shared a room with one of their kids. But my brother needed to stay in the room that I was staying in, and I happily, really happily, went and lived in their crawl space under the stairs.
Okay.
They like built me this beautiful room. It was so cute. I loved it. I felt like Harry Potter
I was just gonna say
under the
Yeah,
stairs.
yeah.
But it was a very safe space. I loved it. I didn't stay there for very long, because like regulation wise, there was no windows, and I
Right.
wasn't allowed to stay there as per my social worker's orders. So then I moved into my own apartment. Well, I rented a room in an apartment in Okotoks where I was going to school.
Okay.
So that's about half an hour outside of Calgary. And before, I was taking a bus from South Calgary to Okotoks every day, and so this was a lot easier for me to just live in Okotoks.
Sure.
And so I rented a room with support of Child and Family Services. So they were paying my rent, and I had an allowance for groceries. And I was in grade 12 at this point, so my last year of high school.
Still like 17 years old.
17, yeah. So I
Wow.
moved into that apartment in January of 2008. And the person I was renting from, he wasn't there very often. He mostly stayed at his partner's place. So pretty much I had an apartment to myself, which was kind of cool, but also
one
strange. In one hand, it
Yeah.
was kind of cool.
But you're 17 and fending for yourself.
Yes. Which, in hindsight, I can see how, like, hard that would have been. But at the time, it felt like, I think it felt like a relief because I was removed from the situation. And I was also relieved that my brother was removed from the situation because when I would stay in Okotoks overnight a lot. I would stay at friends' places. It made sense. So I stayed there a lot and would always be calling my brother to see if he was okay because he was at home kind of managing things by himself. So once he was out of the house, I didn't have to worry about him being there.
Right.
And then my brother went into foster care, from my recollection, around the same time that I moved to Okotoks.
Okay.
So he was with his first foster parent, and I was in Okotoks, and that was in January, and then in February, my mom passed.
Wow.
So, she passed away from chronic ethanol abuse from the drinking.
Yeah.
It's not clear exactly which organs started to shut down first. I did order the death report years later, so I have read that and the toxicology report and everything. But it definitely was, it was unexpected. It was the fear. It was like the phone call that I was always scared of getting.
Sure.
But it wasn't like she was in the hospital or we had any time to kind of process.
Prepare. So
Yeah.
it was so sudden for you. And even though it was in the back of your mind, it really had never occurred to you that it could actually happen.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah, I think about the moment about finding out, and it's like, yeah, everything changed in that one moment. Yeah. So, I didn't stay in that apartment very long. After that, I actually moved in with a teacher. I was very, very close with my drama, musical theater, and English teacher. She played all these roles in my life. She was an incredible support, and I felt very safe with her. And she had actually offered for me to move in with her before I moved into that apartment, and I was like, no, I'm fine. And then when my mom passed, she was like,
Yeah.
do you want to move in now? And I
It's
was like,
time.
yes, please.
Yeah.
So for the remainder of grade 12, I lived with her. And I have very fond memories of living there as well, but I barely remember. I barely remember finishing grade 12. And after grade 12, I went to Mount Royal, now university, then it was a college, for acting. So I kind of threw myself right from high school into like a very intense diploma program where we were rehearsing most nights and weekends. I had a whole new group of musical theater friends, which is just, they were incredible to be around, but there was a lot of distraction. So I did that. I acted for a few years in Calgary afterwards. I moved to Vancouver in 11 years ago now. So I've been out of Calgary for a long time as well, which was a really good decision for me. I came out here with the hope of pursuing acting. At the time, I was still very focused on acting, but it was definitely a way to kind of create some distance from my hometown and everything that happened. And it was kind of a fresh start. I didn't know a lot of people moving out here. I started playing open mics as a way to meet people and kind of be social. And then I just fell in love with songwriting and kind of haven't looked back. I worked with a few counselors or therapists throughout my 20s. Nothing really stuck. I also didn't have a lot of financial stability as an artist, and I sought out resources. I worked with some students who were finishing up their training, so the cost was very low or free. And I did find value in therapy, but it wasn't really until 2020. I was living on the Gulf Islands, and the lockdown happened, and I suddenly had all of this time.
Right.
And physical symptoms of trauma and anxiety started to come up that I realized I was really repressing. I didn't realize how much social anxiety I had. I would socially drink quite a bit to kind of work through that, but everyone's in their 20s and everyone's going out, and I'm a musician, and there was a lot of ways for me to kind of justify that, but I would feel a lot of shame around it and then kind of try to push that away. There was a lot of things I knew that I wasn't dealing with. Songwriting really helped me to start to understand my feelings, to discover feelings that I didn't even know that I had. I'd start writing about one thing, and then I'd finish the song and be like, wow, had no idea I felt that way.
Right.
So that became very therapeutic for me as a creative process. And then during 2020, I decided I wanted to dig into things a little bit more, and I started doing some more somatic practices. I was working with a EFT, or emotional freedom technique, tapping practitioner. Tapping on meridian points really helped me calm my nervous system, and I realized that there was so much more that I could access if I was finding ways to calm my nervous system. And I was out walking and hiking a lot more. I was really getting a lot more in touch with my body, and once I started doing that in these various different ways, noticed all these physical things coming up on my body. I started to have panic attacks. I had quite an intense, I think it was an anxiety, I don't know if it's called an anxiety attack or just a intense anxiety, but I started getting a lot of heart pains. And it persisted for overnight and into the morning, and I decided I needed to call an ambulance to see what was going on. And even just calling the ambulance was terrifying. I didn't want to do it. And my partner at the time was so supportive. And I remember first I called the nurse hotline, and they were like, if you're having any chest pain, we have to advise you to call the ambulance. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be dramatic, is the story that kept coming up in my head. My partner said to me, he's like, the ambulance they're coming to help you. These people are here to help you. And I just broke down in tears. I was just, the idea of any emergency vehicle coming to the house was so triggering. Totally. I was having the heart pains before, but by the time I called the ambulance, I was vibrating. I was shaking. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. And then I went to the hospital on Main Island. It's a small space, and they did all the tests that they need to do on my heart, and they were like, everything looks totally normal. I think you're under a lot of stress. And I was like, okay, yes, this makes sense. And so that was kind of a turning point. And then I just started to notice all these other physical symptoms, like, you know, chronic pains in my body, shooting pains. I started to notice when I was very, very activated and the ways that my brain would work. I would notice myself in conflict when I got really overwhelmed, that my emotional response to little conflicts didn't align
Right.
with the conflict.
Like you were having big reactions to things that didn't need to have a big reaction.
Which just made me feel crazy. Like it just made me feel like, what's wrong with me? That I can understand rationally what's going on and this shouldn't be a big deal, but I felt, you know, so betrayed, so unsafe, so terrified of losing someone over the smallest thing. Felt like I made the biggest mistakes. Like I was just so hard on myself. And this is something that I've always struggled with, but really, really, really tried to push it away. So when I started to explore it and kind of bring these things up, that's when the memories started to attach to them of like, oh, this is a response from something else. And I really tried to explore that.
You've had quite the journey.
Yeah, it's hard to distill it down. I have no idea how long I was just talking.
No, it's I appreciate your sincerity and candor. You know, it's tough stuff.
Yeah, thank you.
And I mean, it certainly sounds like you've done some work to try and suss out what's going on in there and how your reactions now connect to your past.
Yeah.
Yeah. Complex PTSD tends to be traumatic events that have occurred over a period of time, a protracted period of time, and usually instigated by people who you have a trusting relationship with.
Yeah, that's what I've heard as well. That makes sense. Can you talk about the difference between complex PTSD and PTSD?
PTSD can be one event that happened, a fire or a bombing or something that affects someone. Whereas complex PTSD, like I said, it tends to be relational and it tends to be over a period of time. So they're kind of, one's sort of short-term potentially and one's more long-term, generally speaking.
And the impact of that kind of prolonged, repeated trauma, that shows up differently as far as like symptoms and living with it goes? Or does it show up similar?
There are similar aspects for sure, sort of the re-experiencing of events, avoiding situations or people who were involved, those kinds of things. But then complex PTSD also, I guess there's some identity pieces around it. So feelings of self-worth can be, affected. Relationships with people can be affected, and trust in relationships can be a really big difficulty.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. I feel like those are the parts of it that have been harder for me to identify because I just kind of thought that these struggles with relationships, these trust issues, those more relational things were just kind of like part of how I am. And, not that it's not part of who I am, it is, but it's taken me longer to kind of like tease out what might be effects from the trauma and what might not be as far as how I relate to other people, especially in my more intimate relationships.
For sure. I mean, and again, when you've had this trust betrayed by people who, are the closest people to you in the world, how are you supposed to trust an intimate partner? How do you, and we don't know that that's going to be a thing until we're in it, too.
Yeah. Something that comes up there is I've heard this and I have kind of like found it to be true, but wounds that were created relationally, a lot of the healing has to happen relationally as well. Do you think that's true, or can you speak on that idea at all?
That would be where I would come with it, but I also feel like that's where therapy comes in, because ideally, that's the therapeutic relationship is about modeling a healthy, trusting relationship with somebody. So although it's not out there in the world, it's an example of what that might look like. So that's part of that process, but definitely our experiences with people in the world are going to be part of that as well.
Yeah, I've noticed a lot, especially any sort of conflict with my partner. I've noticed that the more that we have little conflicts and the more that I feel safe expressing how I'm feeling, expressing like what my brain's doing and, ways of thinking and kind of my internal reactions that I now understand a little bit better. I can explain them a little bit better. I can explain, okay, so this is what I'm feeling. This is the story that I'm telling myself. This is what my body believes is truth right now, but I understand that that's maybe not exactly what's going on. And if we can kind of communicate around that and work through these moments, the more we have those moments, it's
Less activating?
yes, yeah. It's showing me again and again that I'm safe,
Right.
rather than showing me again and again that I'm not safe.
Right.
So is that like the healing within the relationship? Is that a good
would
example?
Say so. Yeah, and it describes kind of exposure therapy.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Which, is putting yourself in the situation that freaks you out.
Yeah.
Until it doesn't freak you out as much.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it also sounds like you have an awareness of what's going on for you. So that's, I think, the individual work.
Yeah, okay.
Of being able to separate this, wow, my body's on fire, and okay, that's not actually what's happening right now.
Yeah.
And then being able to communicate that to your partner. But you need to kind of know what's going on for you before you're able to communicate that in a relationship. So there is individual work that is essential to this as well.
Yeah, and a lot of that individual work has also been learning to ask for what I need, which has been so hard for me. But being able to say, I think I've been really scared of like asking for what I need for fear of rejection.
Absolutely.
But it's once I have had some practice with it and be like, okay, and in these moments when I'm really activated, it would really help me if, whatever the thing is that I might need in that moment. But that's been healing as well.
Understandable that expressing your needs is challenging given what you've described. You were trying to take care of everybody else's needs so that everything would be okay.
Yeah.
You weren't allowed to have needs.
Yeah.
And there wasn't someone to attend to those. I mean, it sounds like when you were younger, that was there. And then all of a sudden it kind of disappeared or blew up or whatever. And so you've had more practice taking care of everybody else than actually knowing what you need.
Yeah, knowing, let alone being able to ask for it, has been like a huge process. And also having like very supportive, loving people in my life who are there to listen and hold space, and yeah, that's been a huge part of it as well.
Well, and being able to ask for what you need and know that someone can say yes or they can say no.
Yes.
And that's just information.
Yeah.
It's not like a parent not taking care of you. You're an adult now, and you can take that in, and you can choose to have the supportive people around you and not have the people around you that aren't supportive.
Yeah.
But it's so easy in those moments when our nervous system is activated to be like, oh my gosh, like this is terrible and I'm terrible and this is, everything's falling apart.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has been so hard for me to ask for, but I've been practicing doing it, is actually just asking for reassurance, which is like feels very vulnerable, but, you know, something that I've experienced being very hypervigilant and being like constantly scanning people's emotions to see if people are mad at me or something's wrong, because I don't feel like, I think it's getting a little better, but I haven't felt like I could relax unless everyone else is okay. And I still struggle with that, especially in like intense situations. So one of the ways that I ask for reassurance is, you know, I'm going to ask you if you're okay. And it's, you know, it's, yeah.
Right. So you check in with other people to make sure that they're not upset, and that helps you to calm down too.
Yeah. But I think it's a balance too, because I don't want to have to constantly ask people if they're okay. You know, it's like learning to trust that they will communicate it if they're not okay. So it's like the trust goes both ways too.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the trust, I think there's also a trust in yourself piece too, right? Like your instincts are kind of thrown off in a situation like your family's. And so it's hard to trust those instincts. And again, if your body's saying, fire, fire, and it's not actually a fire, like, where do I find those instincts, and how do I know what I can trust in myself?
Yeah, that's been, I think, one of the most confusing parts is what is a reaction related to the trauma and what is like an instinct, you know, like how do I trust myself? It's something I'm still really trying to figure out.
It does sound like you have some perspective on that now. Are there specific things that you've done to kind of access that or work on it?
The self-trust?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of specifics. Like, other than like therapy, a lot of journaling, also recognizing when I am feeling very activated and I am reacting to something, I have so many tools now to help calm my nervous system and kind of reach a place of feeling more grounded, and trying to focus more on my instincts and feelings and reactions from that place rather than taking my most intense reactions as truth. So like trying to let myself calm down before I really try to tune in.
So taking some time.
Yeah, which is hard.
Yeah. Well, and because everything feels so urgent in the moment, right?
Yeah,
but there is time. You mentioned tools. Do you mind like letting me know what sorts of things you do?
Yeah.
Because everybody's unique with this, right?
Yeah.
So different things work for different people.
Number one for me has been walks. Like I have a dog, which is great because it's a reason I have to walk a lot. But I also walk everywhere. I'll go for really long walks if I need to kind of relax. Things like a warm shower or using a heating pad, like warmth generally really helps. Journaling, tapping on certain meridian points really helps. Conversations with close friends, physical contact, like cuddling my dog, cuddling my partner. Those things really help.
And you might know, but I just want to tuck this in there, why some of those things like the heat or the physical contact, what that does for your nervous system?
Yeah, I'd love if you would tell me, but I the way I understand it is it because we're kind of shifting out of a certain state? Yeah.
Yeah, so when we're in that hypervigilant state, our fight or flight response is just, going crazy.
Yeah.
And that's your sympathetic nervous system at play. And those things like heat and physical contact, that's your parasympathetic nervous system kicking in. And that's the part that says, everything's okay. We're good. We're calm, we can make good decisions, everything's going to be fine. So, you definitely, the walks, same thing, like just grounding yourself and getting into that headspace is really where you want to be when you're making big decisions or having to deal with conflict. And it's not easy for anybody, but especially for people who've been through something like what you've been through.
It's hard when anger comes up in me. It like almost instantly like evaporates and goes somewhere else. Like I don't know how to like grab it and try to sit with it. It like turns into sadness right away, or like feeling shameful or guilty. But when I really connect with the teenage version of myself, she's still very angry. And so actually in my music is where it kind of comes out a lot. She kind of has a voice in my music. I notice anger coming out.
That sounds like it's been really therapeutic.
It has.
Yeah.
And feels safer than having certain conversations with people about my anger, especially anger towards them.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. We don't do anger well. We don't teach it well typically in families or anywhere. And I mean, there was no space for your anger when you were a teenager.
Yeah.
Everybody else was taking up that space.
Yeah, and it was terrifying. Anger was this big, scary, uncontrollable, dangerous thing that I wanted nothing to do with it. And so I think there's probably feelings of shame when I feel anger associated with that.
So it's wonderful that you've found a vehicle for that is contained enough that you can express it, but it doesn't feel like it's blowing stuff up.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess maybe it's a healthy way to explore anger.
For sure. I mean, creative outlets are so valuable in the healing process. It connects us with a different part of ourselves, and it allows us to express things that we can't or have a hard time with in a conversation like this.
Yeah. Can you speak to why that is, or how that works? What is it about a creative outlet that allows us to do that?
I don't have the science behind it, at my fingertips, but it does. We connect with different parts of ourselves. When you think about dancing or singing or playing an instrument or drawing, like you get into a different headspace, and we access different parts of ourselves with that it's not verbal. So it allows for things that. Even with songwriting, I'm sure you have sort of a different headspace when you're kind of in a zone.
Absolutely, yeah. And especially if I have an instrument in my hands, I'm doing something with my body, and like ways of phrasing things, ideas I've never like consciously thought of. They just start like flowing out. Like I don't know, like I'll write a song and I won't remember like how I wrote it. Like it wasn't an analytical process. Yeah. It was something else. It was pure feeling. Yeah, it's wild. I feel like I'll never fully understand.
No, but that's like the gorgeous thing about that kind of healing, right? Yeah. Is that's where all that trauma is stored, is in this nonverbal part of ourselves.
That's such a good point.
And so you're giving voice to that.
Yeah.
That we can talk about what happened, but there's a separation between that feeling and the description.
Yeah.
Whereas in creative pursuits, there's no separation.
Yeah, and I think there's also, for me, there's been like less judgment of it's not me saying something about myself, but it's this thing that just came out, and there's some distance there, and it's art, and it's kind of abstract, and it's like I can look at it like outside of myself. a little bit.
So
rather
you're
than,
less judgmental?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm less judgmental of the art.
Because
And
it's
of
art?
the song, yeah,
Okay.
than I am of just my own feelings coming up. And maybe that is that distance of it being like not in here anymore and kind of like existing as this thing outside of me. But for some reason I don't judge it the same way that I judge my feelings. So it actually like allows me to like maybe integrate it a little more, like accept it or yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
So I was thinking about the fact that your traumatic experiences happened when you were a bit older, and reflecting on how that might have been different if you had been younger when it happened. And it does seem to me like you did have those formational bonds that, you know, someone whose experience happened earlier wouldn't have had that, and that's even more destabilizing. So, you know, you had those even if they changed.
Yeah.
Whereas I have clients now whose traumatic experiences happened when they were very young, and they're struggling with relationships, like to the extent they don't have any, and with career and not being very successful with that. Whereas, you know, you do have loving relationships, even if that's not always easy and it brings up all kinds of stuff. And, you know, your career, you have a career, you're spearheading your career. So I'm not trying to take away from the fact that your experience was horrendous, but that there may be some protective effects that they happened a little bit later than they have for other people.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think that, you know, having really strong, loving, safe bonds with my family, with my parents when I was younger, it's absolutely affected me in a lot of positive ways. Like I really have so many great memories, and I really learned at a very young age like what safe love really is and acceptance. And I think that what's the hardest part for me now is just trusting that those relationships can stay. And that also made the shift to what our family was like in those hard years. The grief there, the grief of losing these deep connections has made it really hard to really trust and get really close with people again.
For sure. For sure.